All these people who put the little Ukrainian flag, social media, the signaling, all this stuff, understand that all you're doing is killing them. We don't care about Ukraine. If we did, we would never allow hundreds of thousands of them to die in a war that they can't win. All we're using them to do is inflict pain on Russia.
Could you tell the people what NATO is? All right, cool. So before we get into that, and make sure his sound levels are good and everything else like that. Before we get into that, could you tell the people what NATO is specifically and how it came about?
Sure. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's an alliance of nations that in the North Atlantic. I mean, it's European nations, the United States, Canada, that came together in the 1940s at the end of the Second World War to prevent the expansion of Soviet power into Europe. There was a fear that at the end of the war that the Soviet Union would seek to take advantage of the political turmoil, economic turmoil in Europe that was created by the Second World War, just destroyed nations, so to speak. We had the Marshall Plan in place.
Well, we were an ally with Russia in World War II, weren't we? To fight off the Nazis.
Correct, but here's the kicker here.
Yeah.
The war ends, and we have a defense industry that had been built up. Remember, before the war, we had a Great Depression.
Yes.
Our economy sort of was
in the 20s,
not doing the 30s.
Yeah, 30s. Sorry. Yes.
And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was trying to get us out of the Depression when World War II comes along, and so we build up our economy. We sort of recover from the war, but now the war is over.
Germany got out the Depression.
But if we go back to where we were, we'd have these economic problems. Plus, as part of the war, we took over the world economy. People don't understand. We didn't just go to help England; we destroyed England. We took away all their gold. We took away the French gold. We made the United States dollar the dominant currency in the world. Bretton Woods, 1944, and so when the war ends, there's people who are afraid about America going back to the isolationism that existed before the war. America has to stay involved. In order to stay involved, we have to have a threat. Enter the Soviet Union. They become the threat. Winston Churchill gives a speech in Fulton, Missouri, the Iron Curtain speech. It captured the imagination of the Americans. And so we create NATO to hold off a Soviet threat that, to be honest, didn't exist. The Soviet Union, people don't realize, suffered 27 million dead during the war.
World War II.
Their economy was destroyed. They were in the process of rebuilding. The last thing they want is another war.
Yeah.
But we created NATO. The first Secretary General of NATO, Lord Hastings, a Brit, said about NATO, he said, the purpose of NATO is to keep the Germans down, that is, to keep them suppressed, to keep the Russians out of Europe, and keep the Americans in. Meaning that if it weren't for NATO, America could go back to being sort of an isolationist country. Germany could rise up again, and then the Russians might feel a need to come in. So NATO was designed to do all of that. So that's why NATO was created. NATO expanded. We were fighting. We were worried about communism expanding, so we let the Greeks in. We let the Turks in. We expanded, but its focus again was primarily on containing Soviet power. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1992 or late 1991, early 1992, what was the purpose of NATO at that point?
Yeah.
And that was one of the big questions when the Berlin Wall came down.
Yeah.
One of the key issues that grasped Europe throughout the entire Cold War period was the fate of Germany. What would happen to Germany? It had been split, East and West Germany, the Soviets occupying East Germany, the Allies occupying West Germany. What was the future of Germany? If Germany came together, there was always this fear that this big Germany could become bad Germany again.
Yeah.
And so when the Berlin Wall collapsed and Germany started talking about reuniting, the Russians were a little nervous. The Soviets were a little nervous. They're saying, hey, we need a peace treaty. We haven't signed a peace treaty yet with Germany. We need to understand their future. And what about NATO? West Germany is a NATO country. If we withdraw, are you going to come in and it's going to be unacceptable if you put NATO into East Germany? And he was told by all the NATO leaders, NATO will not expand 1 inch eastward. that you withdraw your troops. There were 500,000 or 400,000 Soviet troops in East Germany. Withdraw your troops, and NATO won't expand one each.
Because after World War II, we basically broke Germany in 3 parts, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or no, 4.
Well, Berlin was in 4 parts. Germany was in 4.
Yeah. Americans took a piece, the British took a piece, the Russians took a piece, and the French took a piece.
Yeah. And then the 3 pieces, the French, the British, the American piece, sort of were consolidated into West Germany. And then the Soviets had East Germany. So now the Soviets are going to withdraw, and we promised we wouldn't move NATO forces 1 inch eastward. James Baker, who made that promise, came back and briefed Papa Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush's national security team. They said, nah, not so fast. We're going to want to expand NATO because we got to keep the Russians down. So we lied to the Soviets. They withdrew. And then we've been expanding ever since. So in 2008, an ambassador named William Burns, today you might know him as the CIA director.
Okay.
But in 2008, he was the U.S. ambassador to Russia.
Yeah.
He wrote a memorandum called Niet means Niet, no means no. And what he said is, if we invite Ukraine to join NATO, the Russians have said that's a red line.
Yeah.
And it will inevitably lead to a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
And when did they predict this? This was back in
2008. 2008. And this was in April. So he said, don't. In November 2008, we invite Ukraine to join NATO. So please understand what I'm saying.
We had been invited them since back then?
We invited them in November of 2008. And
I thought they had been trying to join all this time and they couldn't get in because the country wasn't up to par on certain standards.
The invitation doesn't mean to join immediately. It means we begin the process. We begin the map of, the roadmap of, and all the things that happen. But basically it says, we want you to become a member. And the Russians are like,
what the hell?
Yeah, no. No. No means no.
Yeah.
What part of that don't you understand?
Yeah.
And then in 2014, we carry out a coup in Kiev to kick out the pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was constitutionally elected, and we replace him with these Ukrainian nationalists who are from a party called Svoboda Party, the right sector. Now, let me explain what that is. They're a minority politically in Ukraine. Their roots, they worship a guy named Stepan Bandera.
Okay.
Stepan Bandera was a Ukrainian nationalist from the 1930s, 1940s. He collaborated with Adolf Hitler. Bandera's forces, when they went into, when Germany invaded Poland and then invaded Russia, went in and they murdered 30 to 40,000 Jews. They killed 110,000 Poles. They slaughtered 220,000 Russians because they view all of them as subhuman.
These are Ukrainian nationalists.
These are Ukrainian nationalists, and Stepan Bandera is their leader.
Okay.
He's collaborating with the Germans. Now, as the Russians...
Was Ukraine not its own... Well, I guess it was a part of the Soviet Union, but it was still its own nation, so to speak. They looked at themselves as, we're not Russian, we're Ukrainian. If
you go back, and I mean, this is where it gets controversial about, when did Ukraine happen? The Russian perspective is that Ukraine was an artificial state created by the Soviets, created by Lenin. And they created this artificial state. The Ukrainians are going to say, no, our heritage goes back further than that, et cetera. But here's the thing. The Ukrainian nationalists of Stepan Bandera are people from what we call today Western Ukraine. Western Ukraine at one time was part of Poland.
Okay.
So if actually when Stepan Bandera began his Ukrainian nationalism, it was because the part of the Western Ukraine that we call Western Ukraine today, I think it's Volhynia or something like that, was part of Poland.
Gotcha.
But
he still killed his own people, essentially.
No, because the Ukrainians are different than the Poles.
Okay.
He viewed the Poles as subhuman.
Okay, as enemies. Okay.
Not just enemies. I use subhuman for a reason.
Yeah. Because
these are the ultimate white supremacists are the Ukrainians. These are the original master race.
Gotcha.
They hate the Jews.
Yeah.
They hate the Poles. They hate the Russians. So when Germany comes in, they ally themselves with the Germans, and they're fighting. Now the Soviets are starting to counterattack. So as they push their way through what is called Ukraine, these Banderist groups stay behind as sort of insurgents, and they're controlled by the Germans. So as the Germans retreat, they have these stay behind guys. They're collecting intelligence. They're blowing up bridges, And This was a group, an organization known as the Gehlen Network. Gehlen was the name of of the German general who commanded this intelligence apparatus. When the war ended, the United States captured Gehlen. Now, he's a Nazi, responsible for the deaths of many people. Should have been put in prison, should have been hung by the neck until dead. But Gehlen said, but I have a network of spies and still operating inside the Soviet Union. And we went, oh, sit down at the table. You're our friend now. And we brought him in and we controlled him and we controlled them. And we used them from the very beginning to attack the Russians, to destabilize the Russians, et cetera. So we used these Banderist rebels, these insurgents, to attack the Soviets. And we fought the CIA fought a covert war from 1945 until 1953, 50. And you know, like I said, hundreds of thousands of Russians were killed. 48,000 Russian soldiers were killed during this. So it's a big war. It's not a little war.
So this has been going on since the 50s, 40s.
But in the 50s, the Soviets finally beat them. Hundreds of thousands
These
of them,
Ukrainian nationalists,
the Banderists.
Okay.
They
so
flee.
the audience is tracking here,
Right.
Guys. You gotta stay on point and pay attention.
They flee. They go to places like Germany, England, Canada, the United States. I already told you that Stepan Bandera is a murderer. The CIA itself in its documents say this is one of the worst people we've ever met in our lives.
Responsible for killing Jewish people, Polish people, Russians, everybody,
everybody,
in the name of Ukrainian nationalism.
60 miles from my town. I live in upstate New York, outside of Albany.
Okay.
60 miles from my town where I live is a town called Ellenville, New York.
Okay.
In Ellenville, New York, there's a park called Heroes Park.
Okay.
Heroes Park has 5 statues of Ukrainian nationalists, one of which is Stepan Bandera.
Wow.
Every summer, Ukrainian Banderists get together wearing their Nazi uniforms, and they parade around their nice little blonde hair, blue-eyed Aryan race. They carry portraits of Stepan Bandera. They sing songs glorifying Stepan Bandera. It's alive and well living in America, in Canada, where they've been embedded in the United States since the 50s, 60s, 70s to this day. The CIA continued to fund this operation from 1954 until 1990. And at that point in time, in 1990, they stopped funding it because the nationalists were back in power. We put them in power in the government in 2014. The first thing the nationalists did is they outlawed the Russian language. They passed a law banning Russian culture. And then when the Russians pushed back, they declared an anti-terrorism operation, and they declared all the ethnic Russians to be terrorists. And they began attacking them. In May of 2014, there was a demonstration of pro-Russians in the city of Odessa. The Banderists shoved 150 of them into a building, the trade union building, set it on fire, and cheered as people burned to death, jumped out of the building. Anybody who jumped out and survived, they shot on the ground. Wow. And then they marched on the Crimea. People are like, you keep hearing people go, the little green men, Putin is little green men. You want to know why the little green men went into Crimea? To stop the Banderists from coming in and doing the same thing to the Russians in Crimea. So he stopped it and he said, we're not playing this game. Crimea belongs to us. End of story. So then they shifted up and they went to Mariupol. You might remember that name, the fighting.
Real quick, just because this is something real quick. Guys, like the goddamn video. This is something that came up a lot back in 2014, right? Where people say, oh, Russia invaded Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. So the real reason why they invaded is because these Ukrainian nationalists, the Banderas, were killing innocent Russians,
100%.
ethnic Russians in Crimea. So that's why Russia invaded.
Well, they started in Odessa. Now they went to Crimea. Russia invaded Crimea to take it back and say, no, you're not going to kill Russians
to
here.
stop them from what they did in Odessa.
Right. But then they moved up to Mariupol. Now, we all know Mariupol from the fighting that took place there last year, the heavy fighting in Mariupol, Azovstal and all that, the Azov battalion and this. Well, Mariupol, the Banderas went in there and started literally raping, murdering, terrorizing the ethnic Russians. So the ethnic Russians started to organize into these militia units to defend themselves. And then,
sorry, yeah, no, you good, yeah,
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then, and that's how this war began. So the Russians intervened. People talk about Wagner. You hear about Wagner today, Prigozhin and all that. Wagner was created in 2014 by the Russian government to provide assistance to the pro-Russian ethnic Russians that were defending themselves against the Nazis.
Okay.
That's how Wagner was created.
And is that like a law or what is it specifically?
Well, the thing is,
Wagner.
because Wagner is a Wagner Group, the private military contractors, the mercenary organization
Okay.
that Yevgeny Prigozhin heads, the guy who just launched a coup against
Putin's right-hand guy. They
Yeah.
call him the chef.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
Well,
that was his private army. Okay.
Well, he was
Okay.
he was given the responsibility of building this army, because the reason why is that even though we call these people pro-Russian, ethnic Russians, it's still Ukraine.
Yes.
Lugansk and Donetsk, the Donbass, are Ukraine.
Yeah.
And by law, Russia can't put Russian soldiers on that territory without permission of the Russian parliament, and they weren't giving Putin permission.
Okay.
So the only way that Putin could give military assistance was for Wagner to create a mercenary army.
Ah.
And so then the military
Okay.
assistance came in. So that's how that army was created, to provide assistance
So was
to fight
that
back
army originally created to protect innocent Russians that
from the
lived,
Nazis.
from the Nazis that
Yeah.
lived in?
Yes.
Wow.
Now, here's the thing. They did a
Okay.
really good job. And by 2014, they had the Ukrainian army surrounded, and they were going to kill them all. And that's when the Germans and the French came in and said, please, Mr. Putin, don't kill all the Ukrainian soldiers. Please don't do that.
Don't kill these Nazis.
Don't kill the Nazis. Let's have a ceasefire.
Mhm.
We'll call it the Minsk Accords,
Mm.
a ceasefire agreement. And you'll let the Ukrainian army live, and then we will get the Ukrainian government to agree to this terms where we'll protect the rights of the Russians. We won't kill the Russians. We'll do all that.
Yeah.
And Putin went, okay, I'll agree to that.
At this point, not to stop you, in 2014, they were getting sanctioned, weren't they? Didn't Obama sanction them at this point?
Yeah, they
Because
sanctioned the Russians
yeah,
for Crimea. Yeah,
for
and they're
invading into Crimea.
and they're also sanctioned for helping the ethnic Russians defend themselves against
Yeah.
the Nazis.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I want y'all to know that too, because that's important, because I think that's a big reason why Putin, the sanctions aren't messing them up now. They prepared themselves for
Well,
the
they-
sanctions that came in 2022.
Well, let me put it this way. If I told you that, I'm coming over to your house and I'm going to kick your butt.
Yep.
We're going to box.
Yep.
You'd say, well, I'm going to the gym. I'm going to get a trainer. And I'm going to practice boxing. And I keep talking how I'm going to come over here
Yeah.
and kick your butt.
Yeah.
But all I'm doing is talking.
Yeah.
I'm going to come over and kick your butt. You're training, you're boxing. Now I show up, knock on your door. I'm going to kick your butt, and you kick my butt because you've been training, you've been ready to box.
Yeah.
I've been running my mouth.
Yeah.
The United States has been going sanction, sanction,
You're right.
sanction, sanction. And the Russians are like, okay,
Yeah.
we're
We
ready.
know it's coming. So they pretty much created their
They
infrastructure.
beat us. But
So sorry,
yeah.
continue on. So you were
Well-
saying, so the Minsk agreements. I'm sorry.
So the Minsk Accords comes in. Now here's the deal. There's a ceasefire, stop the war, it saved the Ukrainian army.
Mhm.
The deal with Minsk was that Donbass would still be part of Ukraine. They tried to separate. The ethnic Russians voted for independence in 2014 and begged the Russians to take them in.
Mhm.
And Putin said no. He said, you're part of Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
We will defend your rights, but we're not going to split Ukraine up.
Mm.
A lot of people don't realize that.
I didn't know that.
That Putin didn't want to split up Ukraine. All he wanted was to protect the rights of the ethnic Ukrainians. So,
Why didn't he want to take them in?
because you can't get into it's not taking them in. You can't get into the business of redrawing the map of Europe. That's a messy thing. Once you start changing the borders, you undo the stability that World War II was trying to engender.
Okay.
And Putin believed in that. Look, Putin believes in Russian. In 2005, he gave a speech to the Russian Federal Assembly, their Congress, and it's a speech that's been misrepresented a lot. People say, oh, Vladimir Putin wants the Soviet Union to come back, and I'm like, well, why do you say that? Because he gave a speech. I said, yeah, but listen to the speech. He said, one of the greatest catastrophes of the last century was the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
Now, the people have twisted to say the greatest calamity was the collapse. So they're saying, see, he regrets the Soviet Union collapse, and that means he wants it to come back. I said, wait, there's more.
Mhm.
Listen to what he says. Because overnight, tens of millions of Russians became homeless.
Yeah.
People who used to live in the Soviet Union overnight lived in a foreign country. Russians were now in Ukraine. Russians were in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Uzbekistan.
Ah,
Russians no longer have a home,
yeah.
and they were abused. And he said, I am the president of the Russian nation. And the Russian nation is larger than the Russian Federation. The Russian nation are the people with common language, common culture, common heritage, common religion.
Yeah.
He said, my job is to defend them all. And so now we get to the Donbass. His job is to defend them.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you're going to break up the Ukraine. What it means is you're going to defend the Russians. So he did. He created Wagner. He went to war. They won. Now there's a ceasefire. All that has to happen is the Ukrainians have to sign the deal. They wouldn't. They kept delaying.
The Minsk agreements.
Yeah.
They wouldn't sign them.
No. They kept delaying. They wouldn't implement them.
What was outlined in the Minsk agreements that kept them from signing?
Well, peace. That's the problem. No, I'll get to it in a second because this is a big deal.
Please. Yeah.
What the Russians guaranteed is that they would respect the borders, that they would withdraw all the forces would withdraw behind the borders, that it would be demilitarized, but that the Ukrainians would have to withdraw their own troops from the Donbass and then pass laws that protected the linguistic, cultural, religious rights of the Russians living there, so that they could speak Russian, they could celebrate Russian history, they could celebrate Russian culture. Ukrainians wouldn't change those laws. And the reason why is this, and we now know, Petro Poroshenko was the president of Ukraine at the time. After Putin invaded Ukraine, people asked him about Minsk. He said, the Minsk agreements, they were a sham. We were never going to implement them. We were just using them to buy time so that NATO could rebuild the Ukrainian army. Remember that Ukrainian army that Putin had surrounded?
Yeah.
Was going to destroy?
Yeah.
And let it go?
Yeah.
Because he wanted peace?
Yeah.
Because Putin wanted peace?
Yeah.
Because Putin wanted peace? Because Putin wanted peace.
Yeah.
All these people today, Putin started. I'm trying to tell people right now, Putin is the only person that wanted peace. He is the one. He could have destroyed the Ukrainian army back in 2014. He could have imposed his will on that area, but he chose peace. He was the only one serious about peace. Now, Petro Poroshenko is admitting it was the Ukrainians were never going to sign it. It was a sham. But it's not just that. The Germans and the French that went begging to Putin. Angela Merkel has talked about it. The hardest 48 hours of her life, where she did the shuttle diplomacy, begging Putin to agree to this, to go with this. So Putin did it. She has said, yeah, the whole purpose of that was just to buy time so we could build up the Ukrainian army.
Wow.
Francois Hollande, the French president, the same thing. Most Americans don't realize in 2015, we opened up a U.S. training mission in Ukraine. The job of the U.S. training mission was to train 1 battalion of Ukrainian forces every 55 days for the sole purpose of going eastwards to kill Russians. That's it. We trained them to kill Russians. We were never interested in
2014.
peace. 2014.
2015. And a battalion is roughly for
500, 600 men.
Yeah.
So we did that from 2015 to 2021 or 22. That was our job. Not to create peace, but to train a Ukrainian army to kill Russians in the Donbass. Zelensky ran on a platform in 2019 to be president of Ukraine.
What tactical advantage or benefit do they derive from controlling the Donbass?
Well, first,
Crimea, I can see because it's right there on the water. You have access to the sea. But why the Donbass?
The Donbass is the heart of the Russian economy, the heart of the Soviet economy. It's where the coal mines are. It's where the steel mills are. It's basically the industrial heartland of Russia. It's a Russian territory that was given to Ukraine by Joseph Stalin so that Ukraine would have some sort of economic viability, because without the Donbass, Ukraine is just a bunch of farmers.
Gotcha.
The Donbass is what gives them.
So are the resources shared between Russia and Ukraine from the Donbass?
No, the Donbass, the resources belong to Ukraine. That's
okay.
Well, not now. Now they belong to Russia.
Yeah.
But but again, Putin was willing to let
them have it, but they were killing the Russians. That's why he had to
That's why he had to stop.
Okay.
So in 2019, Zelensky's running for president saying, I want peace. I want to bring about peace. I want peace with Russia. He was elected president because the Russian population of Ukraine said, we'll vote for you because we believe that you'll bring us peace.
Let me ask you this, because people have criticized you and said, you're a puppet for the Russian propaganda machine. You're just pro-Putin. You're just saying all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. It's a bunch of BS, blah, blah, blah. What's your response to all the people out there that say that you're a Putin puppet by saying what you're saying, but saying like, oh, Putin wanted peace or whatever? What's your response to that? Because I agree with you that he wanted peace, but I wanted to see what's your thoughts on the people that hate and say, oh, he's just a Putin puppet. He's just saying all this crap.
Well, you and I had a long conversation about Iraq.
Yeah.
Am I a Saddam puppet?
No.
I think I just answered your question.
There you go for all the
Okay, I'm a
haters. Let's see
fact-based
some,
person.
yeah.
I'll just say this.
I mean, I think the other thing too, just using common sense, if Putin didn't want peace, he could have destroyed Ukraine in one day, guys.
That quick.
Like, come on, man. For all the people out there like saying he doesn't want peace, he literally could have destroyed Ukraine in one fucking day.
I'm probably one of the few people that you talk to that spent the first part of their adult life training to kill Russians. I spent 2.5 years in 29 Palms, California, 24/7, perfecting the art of killing Russians. I went to bed every night praying for war. I wanted to kill Russians.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to call me a Putin fucking puppet? Eat shit and die. Excuse my language. But you know what? I have no time for people like that. I'm a Russian expert.
Mm-hmm.
Before you call me a Putin puppet, challenge me on my facts, challenge me on my knowledge, challenge me on why I take the position I do. I don't take the position because I'm pro-Putin. I take the position because I'm pro-fucking peace.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't understand what I have done in my life to stop war, to prevent war, you know, in the lead up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, I bent over backwards to stop a war. A lot of people don't know that I traveled to Iraq and spoke before the Iraqi parliament. I'm the only foreigner to ever do that. It was a petition to the Iraqi parliament to let UN weapons inspectors back in as a precondition to stopping the war. I came back and people said, you're a Saddam stooge and all blah, blah. Saddam let the inspectors back in because of what I did. And I'm a fucking Saddam stooge. You just had a note from a guy who talked about being a paraplegic, going to Afghanistan, went to war on a bunch of lies. I was trying to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
If you don't understand that, you don't understand jack shit. I'm getting a little angry right now because I just despise.
No, let them know. Let them know. Because a lot of the haters say that shit.
You know, you want to come at me, come at me with facts. You call me a Putin puppet, you better know how to fucking spell Russia first, asshole. All right? You better understand the context of everything I'm saying. If you're going to challenge me on the facts. Tell me that Volodymyr Zelensky, didn't hold a war council shortly after he was elected president where he said, our policy is war, war, war. I got a fucking video that has him saying that. And you're going to say that Putin's the warmonger? He's the only one who wanted peace. The Minsk Accords is something he tried to have implemented the entire time. It's not Putin that said it's a sham. It's not Putin. It was Merkel, Hollande, Poroshenko. Putin wanted it implemented, even when they pulled out of the Minsk Accords in the fall of 2021. Putin's step wasn't to go to war. It was to put draft treaties in place, an appeal to NATO and the United States. Please, one last negotiated chance to end this. Let's not go to war. Let's have a negotiation. The United States and NATO refused to consider this. Even when they did that, he went back to Zelensky and sent negotiating teams saying, come on, we don't want to go to war. Let's find a solution. Let's find a solution. Zelensky led him on. All the while they were taking that NATO-trained army and positioning it to invade. They were scheduled to invade the Donbass in March. Putin preempted it with his invasion. By the way, under international law, Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, self-defense, international law talks about preemptive self-defense, which is what Putin did. Preemptive self-defense. He didn't violate any law. It's not a war of aggression. Preemptive self-defense. And what did he do after he invaded? The whole purpose of the invasion was to get the Ukrainians back to the negotiating table. That's all Putin wanted to do. Get them to negotiate. And it almost worked. They had 3 meetings in Gomel, Belarus in early March. Why? Because the Russians scared the living crap out of Zelensky with their invasion.
Yep.
So they sent the team in, they negotiated. They had a treaty ready to sign on 1 April. Ladies and gentlemen, just think about this for a second. The Ukrainians initialed the treaty. They signed the treaty. We know now because Putin actually brought the documents up, showed it to the African peace delegation that came in and said, why aren't you negotiating with the Ukrainians? He said, guys, we've been trying to negotiate from day one. They aren't serious about it. They signed this treaty. We were ready to sign it. The United States and Great Britain told Zelensky, don't.
Wow.
Because we want to send you billions of dollars of military aid to continue this war. Over 350,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died.
That's what the casualties are at now? 300,000?
350,000.
350,000.
About 310,000 of them.
Where does that number come from for the people? Because I know they're going to ask, where does that number come from?
Well, the number comes from the Ukrainians who are acknowledging
big
numbers
from Ukrainians themselves.
Well, I mean, the numbers come from crunching the data.
Okay.
The Ukrainians have for long said they haven't suffered many, but now they're coming out saying we've suffered more dead than you can possibly imagine. They won't give a number to it. But if you if you run the numbers, if you run the battles, if you talk to the mothers, people have gone in and they're the families are saying, where's my husband, where's my son, also the missing, etc. The numbers come up to around 350,000.
Okay.
We know that Yevgeny Prigozhin's
bare minimum 350.
Yeah, because there's missing and things of that. Prigozhin, who we talk about, Wagner, in the battle for Bakhmut earlier this year, they've killed 75,000, and that's counted bodies. 75,000 Ukrainians physically counted by them. So that's a lot. They just killed 13,000 Ukrainians at the first 2.5 weeks of this counteroffensive, counted bodies. So these are big numbers, guys, a lot of numbers. And the point I'm trying to make is they would all be alive today.
Yeah.
If we had allowed that peace treaty to be signed. And the peace treaty that Putin was going for was basically just to say, look, the Donbass is independent. You guys blew it. We can't let it go back to you. They're Russians. They're going to be independent. Crimea is ours.
Yep.
But everything else goes back to you. You can't join NATO, but we will allow you to have security guarantees from the United States, Great Britain, and elsewhere. We'll guarantee your security. That's all we want.
Wow.
The Ukrainians
I think those are
signed
pretty
it.
fair terms.
Well, especially when you look what happened today. But the Ukrainians walked away, and since they've been in a war, I just want to remind people, because of the decisions made by the United States in pressuring Ukraine to not go along with this peace treaty, there are hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians that are dead who otherwise would be alive. There are tens of millions of Ukrainians who have been displaced from their homes, who otherwise would have a home, be living a normal life. Think of all the children who aren't going to school now, who are refugees, whose lives are displaced, who have lost their fathers. Every one of those dead men is a potential father, brother, uncle, gone
friend,
in their lives, finished, gone forever. There $1 trillion of infrastructure damage has been done to their country, all because the United States wouldn't allow Ukraine to make peace with Russia. Russia's not the problem, ladies and gentlemen. Russia's not the problem. Russia wants peace. Russia's been seeking peace. It's the United States. And now here's the sickest part of all. You've heard the name George Soros. I know everybody's talked about George Soros. Probably can't use that name, get in trouble. But in 1993, George Soros wrote a paper that talked about how NATO is supposed to deal with Russia. And he said, we need to avoid a direct war between NATO and Russia at all costs. Why? Because there'll be NATO body bags that come home, and that's always a bad look.
Yeah.
What they need to do, he said, is come up with a situation where you have Eastern European manpower that's been lured into believing they're going to be part of NATO, but they'll never be allowed to join NATO. And we marry them with NATO technology and use them to inflict pain on Russia. Eastern European manpower, Ukraine, lured into believing they're going to be NATO, but never going to be allowed. 2008, inviting them in, but never let them. Marrying them with NATO technology, tens of billions of dollars of NATO technology to bring pain to Russia. 1993, George Soros put that in place. That's the policy that we have today. That's exactly the policy. We are all these people who put the little Ukrainian flag on your on social media, the virtue
Ukraine,
signaling, all this stuff. Understand that all you're doing is killing them. We don't care about Ukraine. If we did, we would never allow hundreds of thousands of them to die in a war that they can't win. All we're using them to do is inflict pain on Russia. And this is a plan that's been in place since 1993.
Bro.